Hello everyone, it's David Swanowski here with Rubble Road Soapstone Kits, and today we are going to work on the small butterfly kit. So we're going to use the 3 pieces of sandpaper to do our shaping and our polishing on this piece of stone here today. So if you want to get a little closer, take a look, see how I work on this particular silhouette. Alright, so we have our basic silhouette here of the butterfly with the soapstone. We're going to use the 3 pieces of sandpaper here. You could also use a tool for this particular stone, but with this kit we find it's pretty easy to just even use the sandpaper that we provide. So soapstone's so soft we can scratch it with our thumbnail. We're going to use 3 pieces of sandpaper for this particular project. Now we're going to start off with the 60 grit mesh to do all of our primary shaping. And then once we have finished doing that, then we're going to move on to a 320 grit to remove some of our lighter scratches and then really smooth that surface with the final 600 grit after that. So all the sandpapers that we have are made for use in water. I also recommend dipping that rock in the water as well. So with the water here, you're going to find it really helps trap and maintain the mess that you make while carving this stone. Not traditional, but definitely functional. So with the butterfly, we have the wings on the side, the body in the middle, but of course, being a cutout, it's very flat. We need to create some dimension on this stone. Being a stone carver, you have to remember you're not adding any rock, you're only removing it. I like to fold my sandpaper up, my 60 mesh here. I'm going to fold that up, give myself a nice ridge of grit right here. This is what I'm going to use to do all my shaping. So I want to create the body of the butterfly. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to use the sandpaper to kind of carve some grooves along the side, with this middle part being the antenna. I want grooves on both sides of that antenna. To help kind of make that body kind of poke out a little bit, and then we can think about some of the things we might want to do with the wings after that. So a couple little scratches aren't going to be good enough. You really kind of need to make those grooves a little bit deeper. So I'm just going to rinse that dust off, and then I'm just going to go right back to it. Repetition, constant pressure, constant contact, scrubbing into that rock. Just trying to stay on the same track as much as possible. Now, rinse that out. When you rinse the stone off, I also recommend that you rinse off your sandpaper as you use it. This is going to fill up with grit, making it less effective. By rinsing that dust out, it's going to bring all that grit out again and keep your sandpaper working nice and effectively. This groove, looking bolder as I kind of move it sideways here, you can see just how deep that's going into the stone. So I don't think we need to go halfway into the stone. We definitely want to leave a little bit of substance there behind it because we don't want to make too thin on the grooves here. But as we carve into the body on the side, that's what's really going to help raise that middle section up. And that's really what we're looking to do right now, is just kind of raise the body of that butterfly up. So I'm going to do the same on the other side now. The same thing, just trying to stay on the same path. Just carving into that stone. Good rinse. And now I'm just going to check, see how close they are. A little bit more on this side. And as you can see, from making those lines much bolder, it really helps make the body of the butterfly really stand out. So once we've got our grooves deep enough, Then we can start thinking about what kind of details we might want to put on the wings here. So with the wings, I like to try and leave the outside edges roughly the same thickness that they are right now, but I like to kind of taper the wings down so that the body really stands out. So I'm really going to get rid of a bunch of the stone right along these two edges right here. When I want to get rid of a bunch of stone, instead of just using that thin ridge, I'm going to lay my sandpaper down and just cover as much surface of that rock as I can. And while I'm scrubbing away, I'm trying not to touch the center part of the butterfly. I'm getting close to it, but I'm just trying to carve the side of the wings to create that angle. Right now, that's all I'm trying to do. Rinse that off, get that dust out of there. Take a look. So we're creating that angle on the rock. One thing you're also going to notice is that color is starting to come out because I've scrubbed this side. When we cut these shapes out, the bandsaw that we use leaves kind of like a grayish tooling mark on the stone. Even if I'm not going to carve it, I'm still going to sand it. I really want to try and get that natural color out. And the Brazilian stone is very well known for its beautiful color ranges, and also its softness as well. So it's not only easier to carve, but you're going to get some really beautiful colors in this rock as well when you're working with it. And I'm not just going to sand the main face, I'm also going to sand these edges and all the little nooks and crannies on this stone as well. If you want to see that natural color, the only way to do it is to sand it to get that color out. And it doesn't take much. Just a quick little once over, because I want to try and leave that middle section so that it's as high as possible. And it's the wings that I'm going to really concentrate on bringing down. I'm just trying to work on that raised edge on the wing. I'm not trying to carve into the body of the butterfly at all, but then also making sure I'm getting all the way to the edge to really bring out all that natural color as well. So it's getting too dusty, can't really see, you know. Rinse that off, get all that dust out of your paper as well. And the more of the habit you're into rinsing, the cleaner your sandpaper is going to stay, and it's just going to be really effective the entire time you're using it. So I really do a lot of rinsing. Now I'm just kind of looking for symmetry right now on the wings. Try and make sure that my angles coming off the sides are roughly the same. So to do that, I'll change it up. I'll look at it from one side, and then I'll look at it from another angle as well. And I'm just trying my best to match those up. So I've got some decent angles on the wings right now. You can see how the center of the body's kind of raised up now. I'm going to work around the edges just to kind of get rid of some of those gray spots from the bandsaw, just to start to bring out that natural color. For these kind of V-shaped grooves, you can always just use that notch that you have and just kind of open it right up in there, so it just fills that shape, and then just run that back and forth so you're sanding both sides at the same time. Just give it a couple quick once overs and then take a look at it. As I was saying, it does not take a lot of scrubbing to get rid of those tooling marks. Just a quick scuff, really. Especially with this 60 grit, it's really quite effective. The stone is that soft. So this whole edge right here, pretty happy with that. You know, little scratches are okay. Don't worry about having little scratches on there. We're actually shaping this stone right now. You're gonna have to put scratches in it to do any shaping. Sandpaper number 2, when we switch to that, we'll get rid of those little scratches that we've just left behind. So don't worry about any scratches that you're making in there. So for this one, I'm also doing the same thing, just using my sandpaper, folding it in there, and just using my fingers to kind of keep pressure on both sides so that I can sand both sides simultaneously. Tops of the wings, along the side of the head here. Again, all I'm doing right now is just getting rid of those tooling marks from the bandsaw. That's it. Just trying to bring out that natural color in this rock. That's one of the fun things about it, is being so soft. The harder a rock is, the more steps you're going to have involved in the polishing of it. But with the soapstone being as soft as it is, 3 sandpapers does a pretty good job. Lots of rinsing. And if you have a few spots that are being stubborn, try that thumb technique where you put your sandpaper down and then you push your sandpaper just with your thumb. By pushing down on there with your thumb, you get a lot of great pressure there, a lot of strength. So usually those smaller scratches don't stand a chance for long there. All right. and I'm also, even though this is the back side of the butterfly, I'm still going to sand that. I want to bring out that natural color. I want to see it. So if you're not sure if you've gotten all those gray stripes, take a look at it when you've rinsed it off. The gray striping it's all parallel to each other. So if you're seeing a striping pattern in that rock, that means you need to do a little bit more scrubbing. You know, I kind of move mine in a swirling fashion, so any scratches I'm going to see right now are going to be round as opposed to straight lines. That works for me. It's good. So those little scratches are fine. I'm not worried about those. Now I can get back to doing some shaping. I'm just going to kind of round off the bottoms of the butterfly wings here. Just so they're not as pointy. Just kind of working on symmetry with the body and the wings themselves. As you're carving, you might notice that you're using some of the grit on here. If you find that the edge that you originally folded isn't working quite as well as it was when you first started, you might be wearing all that grit away. Just open that sandpaper up, refold it in another spot, give yourself another brand new ridge to do your carving with. And bring the center of those wings down a little bit more. I really want to try and raise that butterfly body up a little bit. It's important to remember not to go too far into that stone. You don't want to make the remaining stone in between here too thin or too narrow, because if you only have a tiny little bit of rock hiding in there, it might be prone to breaking. If you drop it once, it could be a problem. It could cause it to break. But if that should happen, just stop carving immediately. Let your carving dry. Use a super glue and glue those pieces back together. Once that glue is dry, you can just continue sanding or carving, whatever you're doing. It's pretty rare that you can't repair this stone, so. Checking for symmetry on the depth. And this side looks a little bit lower than this side, so I have to bring this side down just to try and match that up. So with the Brazilian soapstone, we get a great range of color. Typically different shades of brown, different shades of green, and then an intermixing of the two. Brown is typically softer to carve with, Green's kind of in the middle. The purest form of soapstone is called steatite, and it's so green that it appears black. Very glassy looking, very shiny. So the trade-off is with the softer rocks, they are easier to carve, but if you're looking for a nice shiny finish on your stones themselves, the harder that rock is, the better a polish it will take. So there's a bit of a trade-off if you're carving the harder stone. Yes, it'll take a little bit longer, but if you want that nice, smooth, shiny finish, it'll be easier to maintain and get that on a harder stone. All right, so I'm pretty happy with the symmetry between the two wings. We're pretty close on both sides. I'm pretty happy with that. I'm gonna just put some grooves in on the sides here to kind of separate the top half of the wing from the bottom half of the wing. We can create a little bit of depth on this piece as well. On the wings themselves. So now because it's a smaller line that I'm making, a smaller area, I just need smaller movements in my sandpaper. Almost bulldozing it into the side of the body there. Lots of rinsing, and you might want to refold your sandpaper to get that new spot as well. And I'll use one side until it's not really working so well, and I'll just turn my sandpaper all the way around and then use that other edge as well. And now we have a nice little groove on the side, creating some depth between the upper and lower part of that wing. So now I'm going to do the same on the other wing. I'm just trying to meet them up at the same part. And if that isn't digging quite to your level, just refold a new spot and go right back to it. So for these two particular lines that I'm carving in there, I don't need them to be as deep as I made the grooves that are on the side of the body. I just want to make sure that those grooves that I'm putting in the sides of the wings are deep enough so that when I actually go to sandpaper 2, I don't have to worry about erasing them with sandpaper 2 because it's still a 320 grit. It will still get rid of a bit of stone. Not quite as aggressive as the 60 grit here, but still aggressive enough to do some stone removal. So that's why it's important to make sure that your grooves or patterns that you're putting in your rock are deep enough before you go to sandpaper number 2 to get rid of those scratches. And the only way to do that is just repeating, staying on that same groove path and just working that pattern deeper into the rock. Not bad, you can definitely see those in there. So now I'm going to create a little bit more angles here. I'm going to actually scrub the top parts of the wings. I'm going to lower them down a little bit to really kind of make these bottom ones stand out a little bit more. So again, just kind of laying my sandpaper flat. And I'm going to try and stay away from the lower part of the wing and just concentrate my efforts on the upper half. Just trying to change the levels of the rock here, add some depth to this carving. This is where the thumb technique come in really handy as well. And because the soapstone has no grain, you don't have to follow a specific sanding path. You can sand in any direction that works for you. And as I kind of work that, you can kind of see how it's creating a little bit higher ridge. So this is sticking out a little bit more. I'm going to bring it down. I still have quite a bit of stone there. It's pretty substantial. So I can definitely get rid of some more rock here and I'll be fine. Do the same on the other wing here as well. Carve that lower. And change the angle that you're holding that carving at, just to try and get it into a position that's easier for you to kind of get at the spots that you want to carve. Just trying to get rid of that rock. And again, just kind of checking for symmetry here and there, right? Trying to make sure I have them both around the same depth. Getting pretty close. Again, I'm not worried about any scratches that I'm making in my rock. We'll get rid of any scratches we don't want with sandpaper number 2. But I am trying to make sure that the scratches that I am leaving aren't super deep. If I want a nice smooth surface, the smaller these existing scratches are, the easier they will be to remove with sandpaper number 2. Just gonna fold my sandpaper up a few times here, give myself a nice aggressive ridge here, just to kind of really dig into those corners between the upper and lower wings here along the side of the body. These little corners in here are going to be your toughest spots. So just try smaller movements. Okay. There's definitely some depth now. You can see the lower parts of the wing kind of standing up a little bit more because we carved the front wings, top part of the wings down to really kind of help create some depth on there. I'm pretty happy with that. I like it. So now I can think about softening some of the edges on the body here. Maybe even making a groove down the center here to kind of symbolize the antenna of the butterfly as well. If I want to make a groove, I want to try and fold my sandpaper up to get the thinnest possible ridge I can. And I'm not going to go too far down here because with those thinner antennae, they're going to be very delicate. And you definitely don't want to make them too long down into the top of the head of the butterfly. Trying to keep my sandpaper as straight as possible, just to try and keep that groove nice and centered along there, as much as possible. And we could also, for the bottom of the butterfly here where everything is very flat, we could also carve those antennae or the head higher up to kind of create some depth on that as well. Just to change some levels. So I'm just going to concentrate just on that head area. That's pretty much it. And just smaller circular motions. Trying to raise that up, so it's like the head will be sitting off the ground or off the table when it's actually rested down. fold my sandpaper up a bunch of times, making it thicker, makes it a little bit more aggressive. Just because it's so thick right now, it doesn't fold very easily. I'll use this sandpaper until it's pretty much falling right apart. As it's been sitting in the water, it's definitely more pliable now than it was when I first started. But it still has a lot of life in it yet. And I've kind of carved that down a bit. So it's got a little bit of a lip here. I don't need to get rid of too much. So I think I'm going to do the same on the other side here and carve the top of the head down a little bit. Just to really help make that body stand out a little bit more. Just trying my best not to touch the tips of the wings while I'm doing this. And now that my sandpaper is a little bit softer from sitting in the water, it's a little bit easier for me to kind of fold it into my hand to make sure that I'm only contacting the areas that I want to. Softening those square edges. So the head's a little bit narrower on both sides where the antenna are. Just going to try and round off that edge. Without touching the other wings as much as possible. Just going to make that groove for those antennae a little bit deeper. Now that I've got the head narrowed a bit. I don't want to go too far. No, that's not too bad. That's pretty good. I'm just gonna run over those square blocky edges just to kind of soften them up a little bit as well. Working on those edges for the wings. Now I'm just kind of looking over my piece, just kind of fine tuning some of the grooves and lines that I've made just for the definition of the piece itself. Just making sure that those are deep enough before I go to sandpaper number 2. When I'm done with sandpaper number 1, I just kind of knock that water out of there, set it off to the side. I'm pretty happy. I've got some depth on my piece here. It's not just a flat surface. Check it from the sides. I still left quite a bit of substantial stone on the very edges of my wings. Most of my work was done just on the sides of the body. So now we're going to go over to sandpaper number 2. Sandpaper number 2 is a 320 grit. All the sandpapers are made for the water, so I'm going to put that in there as well. Once I go to sandpaper 2, the one thing I'm going to try not to do is I'm going to try not to scrub my soapstone on the bottom of my bucket because of sandpaper number 1. As we use this first grit, you can see some of the lines here where the grit has just worn away. That grit is now at the bottom of the bucket. This is silicon carbide. It's harder than the rock we're carving here today. So we want to make sure we're not scrubbing our soft rock against those jagged little pieces on the bottom of the bucket. If you have easy access to water, you could always swap out your water right now, get some fresh stuff. But as I'm pretty aware, I'll be okay. So with sandpaper number 2, make sure the side with the writing on it, that's just paper. Make sure that you're scrubbing your stone with the grit side. I also like to fold even my sandpaper 2 in half, so now I just have a double-sided piece of paper. Sandpaper 2 is going to get rid of all the little scratches we just left behind with sandpaper number 1. So again, just constant pressure, constant contact, doing as much surface coverage as you can, swirling that around. Now again, your sandpaper is going to be filling up with dust, so we're going to be doing a lot of rinsing for this. Give it a good rinse. Take a look at it. So you should really see that color starting to pop right now. We still have one more sandpaper to go to, but right now we are looking to get rid of any little tiny scratches that we do not want. The last sandpaper is a 600 grit. It smooths the surface really, really well. It's not so much a scratch removal paper, so we want to make sure all the scratches we don't want to see are gone before we go to stage 3. And then again, we're going to get all the edges everywhere. And if you did a nice consistent job with sandpaper number 1, slightly small scratches, but nothing too deep, sandpaper 2 should be fairly easy. If you do happen to go to sandpaper 2 and you notice, well, you know what, those scratches are still pretty deep, you could always go back to sandpaper 1, make those scratches a little bit shallower so that they're easier to remove with sandpaper number 2. Lots of rinsing. I do a fair bit of rinsing when I'm carving. I do a lot of rinsing when I am sanding. I find I get a better sanded finish using water. Just by rinsing it off, it allows me to see the spots that I have missed. And again, that thumb technique in some of those concentrated areas is really effective. And if I'm just working on like a broader area, I'll just open that sandpaper up to just cover as much surface area as possible. Get as much of that stone as I can. Rinsing and looking. Making sure, try and get a nice consistent finish. So around the antenna area of the head, it's going to probably be the most delicate area on the butterfly. So I'm just going to be, a little bit more careful around there. Even though Sandpaper 2 isn't the last one, it probably is my favorite one because you really start to see the natural colors of this rock coming through with Sandpaper number 2, and I love that. I love changing this rock up. Kind of like having a picture that's out of focus. Once we start to do our sanding, we start to bring the colors and the natural patterns that are in this rock into a clear picture for us to see. And another reason to use the water, especially when sanding, is this dust will really clog up that sandpaper. So when I don't use water, I probably go through 10 to 15 times more sandpaper when I'm not using water. Just by rinsing it out, gets all that dust out of there, really helps get the most use out of this sandpaper. Really, really effectively. Round that body off a little bit more with Sandpaper number 2. And just like Sandpaper number 1, you might want to open it up, refold that paper in a new spot if you find it's not working as well as it was when you first started, because it will start to wear away eventually. And if your piece of soapstone has more mineral inclusions in it, typically iron, that can tend to want to chew up that sandpaper as well, so that's why I do a lot of rinsing. So now with Sandpaper 2, I'm just looking everywhere to try and make sure that my finish is consistent. I'm just looking for the nice smooth finish. If I see any scratches, tucked in corners, that's what I'm going to go for. And if you want to, you can fold this sandpaper up 1, 2, 3, 4 times. Tuck it into those hard to reach areas to just do the best job possible. Taking my time. Patience is going to be your best tool when you're a stone carver. With soapstone, even though it's the softest rock out there, it's still a rock, so it's still going to take you some time to do some work on this, so don't feel rushed. Lots of rinsing here, especially when I'm in these corners where I have elevation changes in my stone. Those are going to be some of the hardest spots for you to get at. So I'm going to fold my sandpaper up yet again, create a nice thick ridge right here. I can use that to kind of really dig in to those corners. Making sure I'm not scrubbing it on the bottom of my bucket. I don't want to be putting any extra scratches in here. Just looking for any scratches that I don't want to see. I want to make sure they're all gone before I go to stage 3. The 600 grit is going to do a nice job smoothing this stone out, but not as effective at getting rid of any little scratches. So we want to make sure all the brunt of that work is done with sandpapers 1 and 2. And also feel around as well. Be very textural. You should notice a definite difference in the texture of this rock with sandpapers 1 and 2. It's not bad. It's pretty close. All right. Pretty happy with that. Not really seeing any scratches anywhere. Oh, maybe right there. So that's why we move this thing around from different angles. So we really look at it from every possible angle. There, I'm ready for sandpaper number 3. Sandpaper 2, get rid of that excess water in there, set it off to the side. Sandpaper number 3 is the 600 grit. It's also going to go into the water. And again, I'm trying to keep my soapstone carving off of the bottom of my bucket right now. I'm going to fold that sandpaper in half. And just click once over. All the main work was done with sandpaper 1 and 2. So now we're just kind of finalizing the finish on here. Just with this 600 grit. And it should feel like glass. All that natural color's coming out, not looking as gray as it was when we first started. Beautiful greens, black, all intermingled through here, really nice. And now I'm just looking to run over every single surface contour that I can, as best as I can with sandpaper number 3. So your bigger surface parts are the easiest ones to get. It's all those little tiny nooks and crannies that are going to take you the most amount of time. Just try and be as consistent as you can. Being careful not to break those antennae off. Try not to drop your piece either, especially after all your hard work. I know in the classroom it's always exciting to show your friends what you have. Just try and make sure you're staying over your bucket as you're showing your friends, so if you are going to accidentally drop it, it would end up back in your bucket and not on a hard, unforgiving floor. I'll fold this sandpaper up a few times, thicken this up. Lots of rinsing. I'm just really working into those corners on the side of the body, where those little elevation changes are in the stone. Those are going to be the toughest spots to really get a nice consistent finish on. So I'm just doing the best I can. Change the angle of my paper to try and make sure I'm getting both sides. Once you have all 3 sanding stages finished and you're happy with your carving, I really recommend you go rinse this off in clean water. We want to make sure we're getting rid of this dusty water here. We don't want any of these dust particles on our carving when it's dry, so that when we do the very final oiling, we have a nice, clean, dry surface. I typically let mine sit overnight to make sure that they're nice and completely dry. In case there were any cracks or seams or anything that didn't break, they will be holding onto that water right up until the very end. So I always like to let it sit for 1 day before I do my oiling. Pretty good. You know what? Feels pretty amazing. I'm pretty happy with the patterns that I put in here. I think I'm good. I think I'm pretty happy with my butterfly. So I'm going to go rinse this off in clean water, get this to dry before I can do my final oiling. All right, so now that we have the carving dry, we're gonna apply the finishing oil. So I'm gonna oil the back side first. I've always got some paper towel down just to protect the surface that I am oiling on. We just want a nice thin coat across the entire piece. Looks really good. And then for the oil, I like to let this sit for at least 2 hours, and then I just wipe off the excess with that paper towel. I find that's pretty good. There's typically enough oil in the little containers where you can do more than one oiling on your piece if you like. For these small kits, I'm going to get all these little edges here on the sides. Just turning this around everywhere, looking for any dry spots where I've possibly missed, just making sure I've got everything as good as I can. All right. I think that's all of it. Looks pretty good. still have enough oil there for another coating if I want. So I'm going to let this sit for a couple hours, wipe off that excess oil, and I have my very own finished soapstone carving. Alright, thank you very much for joining me with the small soapstone kit in the butterfly shape here today. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Check out our website. You can see some of the other shapes that we have available for you to carve as well. And if you like what you see and you'd like to see more of our tips and tricks, please like and subscribe as well. Thank you very much for joining me here at Rubble Road Soapstone Kits. I'm David Swinowski.